Hey, what is going on, all my fellow godlies and Marvel enthusiasts around the world? I am Vance, better known for my Warframe God Build series on the popular PC, PS4, and Xbox One game Warframe. But if you're a fellow subscriber and viewer, you already know that. I just don't have a whole lot of time to explain that I just saw Captain Marvel and holy shit! Wow! How do I even get through this video right now? I am torn. I am between a rock and a hard place because I am on both sides of this civil unrest that's going on YouTube. The social justice warriors who just deduce every topic to men not wanting to see women in major roles, and the men who defend themselves by saying, well, Brie Larson is anti-men because she made a joke in front of a podium about 40-year-old men critics.
Earlier this week, USC Annenberg's Inclusive Initiative released findings that 67% of the top critics reviewing the 100 highest grossing movies in 2017 were white males. Less than a quarter were white women, and less than 10% were unrepresented men. Only 2.5% of those top critics were women of color.
While admittedly that does sound super offensive and it alienates men, it does do that regardless of whether or not she's intending it to do that. The fact remains that it could have been taken a whole lot less seriously. Even the jokes that were being made on Jimmy Kimmel about how she hates her fellow co-workers over the course of 3 different films with Samuel L. Jackson, I see nothing wrong with that either. Jimmy Kimmel even made the joke that that is probably not the message that Disney and Marvel wants to send to kids.
Color. So there's things that only we know.
I see, and they have to be from way back.
Oh yeah.
Just to make sure you're not Skrulls.
They deal mostly with people that we hate.
Oh, is that right? Mm-hmm. I won't even ask you who those people are.
Yeah, we're pretty stealthy about it.
But there are people that you mutually hate.
Of course.
That would mean, because I am a detective, I'm going to say you know those people from the movie King Kong.
Well, we've done 3 movies together, so there's a lot of people to hate in 3 movies.
I see.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the message that Marvel wants to spread to children.
Which he's totally right. It isn't the message, but again, it's Jimmy Kimmel, so there are jokes that are being made, and I don't think that Brie Larson should be taken so seriously. And I've done some digging on this chick. I really have. I've done some digging. I found out that Brie Larson isn't her real name. It's some French shit that is highly intense and hard to pronounce.
Brie Larson might be a household name, but it's not the one she was given at birth. Larson was born Brienne Sidonie de Saulnier, which almost sounds like a Game of Thrones character. In the same vein as Judy Garland and Marilyn Monroe, she decided to adopt a stage name that was easier to pronounce.
But she is also a writer and a film director in her own right. And I've looked at some of her performances in other movies, just clips, because I'm not going to commit my time to a full, hour-long, 20-minute video of, just to get some retrospective here. But her acting skills were solid in what I saw. But at the same time, I can make that same comment about the Miss Marvel movie itself, or I'm sorry, Captain Marvel. I don't want to offend any SJWs, God forbid. God forbid I sound like a woman-hating man. I'm such a misogynist piece of shit. Anyway, so I think that Brie Larson as Captain Marvel did fucking incredible. And I say that because I am a Miss Marvel fan. I've been a Marvel Comics fan pretty much all my life. And my initial introduction to Miss Marvel was in the New Avengers comic book line that took place, I think, maybe in 2008. Please don't quote me because I'm probably fucking up the years. I have terrible placement with names to faces and book titles to years. So I was first attracted to Miss Marvel, and I use that word emphatically. Attracted. I mean sexually aroused, like I was given a boner by the stripper outfit that Miss Marvel was put in. And here's the thing. I'm not going to get upset about men or women being rendered or relegated to sexual objects within the comics, and here's the reasoning for that. If you go back to when comics was first invented, it was founded upon the ideas and principles that the Michelangelo statues were on, that we would be creating these titan-like beings, these god-like entities who were heroes, and they were all strong and athletic, which would mean that they would support a superior physique.
Anthony Mackie wants Falcon to have a new look in upcoming Avengers 4. While speaking to attendees at Ace Comic Con this past weekend, the actor expressed his desire to don Falcon's signature red and white costume on the big screen in the next installment of the superhero franchise, saying, I'm pushing for it. I've been pushing for spandex for 8 years. They won't give it to me. Website ScreenRant.com shares that, however, considering that the Avengers Infinity War magazine covers show Falcon sporting a darker colored suit, it doesn't look like Mackie will be getting his spandex costume just yet.
How'd you feel?
Taller.
Which would entail them to be pretty sexually attractive to potential mates, and so therefore that is literally the way that they have been drawn. I mean, take Wonder Woman as a reference. Her origin story is literally about the creator and his wife's mistress. These people had threesomes on a regular basis, or so the story goes. And those fancy arm gauntlets that Wonder Woman wears, yeah, that was something that their mistress wore as jewelry. It's less exaggerated, the realistic version that she wore, but you get what I'm saying here. My point that I'm trying to make here is that the SJWs online are always making it an issue about a chick not being sexually appealing, and that we should just calm down when we're upset because women aren't attractive enough for the role. Well, I have a counter argument to suggest here. Miss Marvel was busty. She was very light blonde, fair skinned. She just has Baywatch written all over her, okay? And that is how I was drawn to her from the jump. See, that's the thing about drawing a sexually attractive character, is that if it's attractive in some way, shape, or form, rather it's got a good color scheme, or the designs of the uniforms badass, or it's sexual, it will grab the audience eye. And when you grab the audience's eye, 10 to 1 says you have their attention as well, and therefore they're more capable of learning about this character, which is exactly what happened to me. I totally got a nerd boner for this character, her along with Spider-Woman. Because, hint here, there's another popular MCU character who nobody knows about because she only exists in the comics. I don't even think she's been in a cartoon yet. But she's very lesser known. And it's a shame because she's very interesting. She has a very similar story compared to Jessica Jones. So if you're a fan of Jessica Jones, be looking up Jessica Drew, the Spider-Woman. The way I was introduced to these two women in the New Avengers aroused me. And it was because of that arousal that I felt inclined to know more about these women. And when I learned about these women, I learned that they were very special to the Marvel Comics. They were unique. One was really, really powerful and borderline undefeatable. She is indeed one of the most, if not the most powerful Marvel character that they have to show in the MCU. While Spider-Woman, on the other hand, is a very vulnerable chick. She's been considering hanging it up for a long time. She even did for a while, and that was her introduction in the comic series, is that she was just putting on her costume for the first time in a long time, and my oh my, did it show her curves. So I have nothing wrong. Like, I don't think that there's anything at all wrong with a character being sexually attractive. In fact, I would encourage people to write it that way and stop listening to social justice warrior nonsense. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I get it. I understand SJW arguments, it's not necessary for a character to be sexually attractive. You can write or illustrate a character that's not sexually arousing and win over the hearts of audiences in other ways. But my argument with Brie Larson portraying Miss Marvel is the fact that she doesn't represent Miss Marvel physically. She doesn't look it. I mean, for God's sakes, they're hailing this movie as a representation of feminists worldwide when on the same movie, Marvel hired a butt double. Literally. Like, if that's not body shaming to some degree, I don't know what is. Because you're literally saying that your lead star has such a flat ass that you need another character to come in and superimpose their ass over her body. That, to me, is not a very good representation of a feminist propaganda in social media. If you want to do feminist propaganda in social media, why didn't you refer to Alita, Battle Angel, or Wonder Woman, or even the Alien series with, Ripley? It just it makes better sense that way. There's just so many more alternatives. I don't know why this is your go-to movie to push that propaganda. Maybe because Brie Larson has identified as a feminist? Well, maybe she identifies as a traditional feminist when feminism first got started. The more I learn about this chick, the more I learn that, being as that she's a comedian, she's pouring all over a lot of sarcastic humor to her stand-up conversations in public, which I would call this the Donald Trump syndrome.
Well, I actually agree with that. I agree with everything she said.
It tends to happen with people who are very unintelligent. They take everything that the person says literally, and they take it to heart. They don't live their life with a sense of humor, and so Brie Larson, just like Donald Trump, goes on to become very misunderstood. Very, very, very misunderstood. Because I have this post here, which I totally agree with. It made me completely change my mind about her. I quote, "You're right, but men go through this too. 2.78 million men are survivors of sexual assault in the U.S. alone." And for her to stick up for sexual assault survivors is just heartwarming for me to see. It's heartwarming for me to see a woman sticking up for a man in a society in which men are laughed at when they're abused. They're laughed at when their women abuses them in public. You can literally find videos of social media experiments on YouTube or Facebook. You can find instances in which Terry Crews was reprimanded for coming out about his sexual assault. It's just a terrible society that we live in. So when she talks and speaks out for us, I gotta regard her as a good person, even if she said some questionably alienating things. So a lot of the accusations I see getting thrown at her is that her acting is stiff. Well, if you ever watched Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, the animated web series, which I think is by far the best cartoon series ever produced by Marvel, ever. I stress that word ever. Definitely better than the Disney XD bullshit they've got going on. But anyway, I digress. Miss Marvel acted that exact same way. Furthermore, she's always acted that way. If you think that a character is lacking personality because they are the strong and silent type, well, I'm sorry, but that's who Miss Marvel is. That's who she's always been. She's been that way in the comics. She's been that way in the animated series. Brie Larson was probably told and instructed to act this way, and so that's why I say Brie Larson represented Miss Marvel well. So have your complaints with the character Miss Marvel, but don't have them with Brie Larson, because you would be infactual to state that her acting is bad, because it's really actually spot on. Man, I can't talk enough about this movie. The one thing that's really wrong with the movie that people aren't talking about is the fact that it didn't make a lot of sense. Samuel L. Jackson was way overused. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Samuel L. Jackson. From Pulp Fiction to The Kingsman, all of his performances are crazy good. He hits home runs every time he steps up to the plate. So I totally love seeing this guy in every movie that he does. But at the same time, his purpose as Nick Fury was not needed in this movie as much as what they used it for. And one of the things that I don't understand is the logic behind it. So Miss Marvel is taken into consideration as a galactic threat to Earth. It's kind of assumed that way, but they don't really know that. They kind of poke fun at that, saying that she's wearing a laser tag costume. And then all of a sudden they get shot at by Skrulls. And then I guess Nick Fury just assumes that she's the good guy, because Skrulls are taking the form of people around them. This leads into one of the most confusing moments in this entire movie. Why in the hell does Nick Fury catch up with this chick, have a brief conversation with her about what's going on, and then takes her back to S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters and in the back rooms? He just takes her back in. Like, you are a top secret, like, military intelligence as a defense of the nation, and you are letting in an alien. Even Superman did not do that in such a shill movie like Batman v Superman. So I don't know why it's going on here. Crazy. It makes no sense. I have no idea what the hell is going on. And another thing that's being shit on is the actual origin story of Miss Marvel. So the Supreme Intelligence is not a figure that appears as an important character in your life. It's literally a floating head, a giant floating head in a like a fish tank. Okay, but regardless, that reboot doesn't even matter. What really matters is the fact that there is no instance or no evidence whatsoever of SWORD, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s counterpart. Real quickly, SWORD is an acronym for Sentient World Observation and Response Department. So it was quintessential to the origins of Miss Marvel. She should have been introduced to SWORD through Nick Fury, and that's all they should have used Nick Fury for, really, is to introduce her to SWORD. And then through SWORD, she meets Mar-Vell, which Mar-Vell was rebooted to be a woman. I feel as though that was completely unnecessary, because Mar-Vell was a potential love interest for Brie Larson in this movie, or he could have been.
Why did you do that?
If Ronan wins, there's still a chance humanity can survive. That you can survive. If he loses, the Kree Empire is 100,000 star systems strong. Earth will be crushed.
If you really knew anything about humanity, you'd know we could never do what you're asking.
But I don't know. They could have made Miss Marvel just flat out lesbian. That would have worked too, I guess. That would have definitely appealed to some social justice warrior crazies. And LGBTQ, whatever. Man, I'm too old for all these groups and stuff. Can't we just go back to calling each other people? I mean, fuck's sakes. Anyway, so SWORD is absent from this, and there's been many movies in the past that I claim have been perfect Marvel movies, but at the same time, they've utterly butchered comic book storylines. Take, for example, Captain America: Civil War. Now, they've spent 10 years building up the Infinity War and Thanos, when really they should have spent that entire 10 years building up the Civil War. So for anybody who's just a casual fan and has just checked out the MCU and never really dabbled in the comics, the Marvel Civil War event was a graphic novel, meaning that it was chapters long and spanning over the course of books. I don't know if you've actually seen a graphic novel, but they're pretty thick. They're not your typical comic. They're like, sometimes they have hard covers because they're a legitimate novel. And so a lot of monumental things happened. big monumental things. Like it kind of went the same way in terms of beginnings. The New Warriors went after a mutant called Nitro, and they caused him to set off, blow himself up essentially, around like children on a school bus, which resulted in them dying. And in the movies, it's similar. Scarlet Witch does the same thing with Crossbones, lifts him up into the sky, and then when he detonates, she detonated him too close to a building where people were there, and so the Soviet Accords takes place, whereas the Superhero Registration Act is what takes place in the comics. Now, where it differs is the movie only showcased a civil battle, and I stress that word, battle, because it was literally only one fight that they had. In the comics, however, it was an all-out war. Critical things happened. Like, one of the New Warriors responsible for that whole incident, named Speedball, he was a relatively generic and underrated character. Well, probably overrated, actually, because he was on a team with Nova, but he was just outshined by everybody else. And his one feat includes, like, taking down Terrax, which is a Herald of Galactus, which was otherwise a pretty radical thing to do, but it was during, I don't know, man, it was like, I think it was in the 90s. I was still a little kid, and I barely remember it, but Speedball's never been really that big of a fuss. And so what they did with his character is they tortured him. And his powers became so suppressed that the only way he could access them was by inflicting pain upon himself. And so they constructed for him a suit which is like an Iron Maiden, meaning it's got spikes on the inside of the suit. So every time he gets in the suit, it impales him, and every time he fights, the punctures hurt him and cause him to be able to channel his energy properly. And this guy was like Edgelord Supreme. He evolved from a kid, like a boy, to a man in the Civil War. He went from Speedball to the motherfucking Pendulum. And this guy was brutal. Even in the Marvel game, what's it called? Alliance, Marvel Ultimate Alliance. He was one of the most fun and interesting characters to play. I wanted to know more about him. But, more monumental things happen. Like, if you watch Ant-Man and the Wasp just recently, it featured Goliath. But Goliath actually died in Marvel Civil War, and they have not brought him back from the dead. He has stayed dead this entire time. I'm just trying to give you a point here. How critically underplayed the Civil War went. This was the entire Marvel universe at war. Fantastic Four, X-Men, you name it. Spider-Man unmasked in this series to the world. He showed the world his identity in this Civil War. This is how monumental this one event in time was. One could actually argue that so many critical things happened in the Civil War that it would outshine the Infinity War by comparison. Because you look back at the original books to which Infinity War gets its storyline from, and it was meh. It was okay. It wasn't that great. Again, Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 is another perfect representation of a really great movie that just shat on a bunch of comic book storylines. Now, again, I regard Iron Man 3 as a really good movie. Like 9 out of 10. Really good movie. Very entertaining. However, if you recall, Colonel Rhodes donned the Iron Patriot suit. That didn't happen in the comics. You want to know how that really happened? Norman Osborn, one of the villains in the Rogues Gallery of Spider-Man, built for himself a suit that was an amalgamation of Captain America and Iron Man. Henceforth, the name Iron Patriot, and hence the mixing of colors from Captain America's template over onto Iron Man uniform. So there you go. Norman Osborn effectively cannot become a Dark Avenger in the MCU, or at least he's going to have to do it by very different storyline means, because they kind of butchered that in Iron Man 3. They also butchered the concept of Mandarin, because, I get it. Mandarin's concept was really dated. He had rings that were very, very similar to the Infinity Gauntlet and the way that they function, so he kind of needed to be modernized, but the way they did it was just really bad. This character got whitewashed, even though the character playing him was really, really good. The real life person. He was Mandarin was supposed to be Asian, and he was supposed to be an actual villain, and he didn't turn out to be a villain. Possibly one of the biggest storylines that was butchered, in my opinion, about Iron Man 3 was the Extremis. In the comics, there was only one guy who was infected by the Extremis, and it was like with black goo, similar to like the symbiote Venom. Except for it didn't take over his body. It didn't change the way that he looked. It just changed. It just made subtle changes, like made veins pop out in his face, and just made his face like overall ugly. It's been a while since I've seen the comic. I haven't even looked it up recently on Google image search, so I think that it blacked out his eyes. Just crazy stuff like that. But he was crazy powerful, man. He could throw a forklift at Iron Man. He could take otherwise lethal blows to the head and regenerate from it. He had nothing to do with his body superheating or anything like that, and there certainly wasn't any more than just one person who had the Extremis, because he injured Tony so bad that Tony was going to die. He was forced to integrate the Extremis in his own body so that he could heal from his wounds, and that is how he formed that telekinetic bond with the armor, is through the Extremis. He programmed the Extremis to, connect with his like neural interface with his mind, and so he could telepathically assemble the armor. And they totally went against that in the movie. They bypassed that completely. They made him assemble his armor in a totally different way. It's still in similar fashion. It's like he can still summon the armor to him, but it's just the writing behind it, man. I don't agree with it. And then the last point I want to make about Iron Man 3 before I get back to the point of the Captain Marvel movie is the absence of MODOK. MODOK was an quintessential timeline for AIM, the Advanced Idea Mechanics. Anytime you want to include that antagonist group, it should probably have some type of Easter egg indicating MODOK's presence if you're not going to show him outright. And I think Marvel was just afraid to do a ridiculous character, because MODOK is just like a floating head, like a really, really enlarged head in a chair with small limbs, like small arms and small legs. He looks ridiculous, but that's why I love this character, is because he's ridiculous. It's one of those things that it's so crazy, it just might work. Like if they just went for it and they did the best they could with their advanced CGI, because their CGI technology is second to none in Marvel. They de-aged Samuel L. Jackson perfectly, and Coulson, but they added age on to Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackson. It's like if Hugh and Samuel L. Jackson had okay, never mind. Horrible mental image. So anyways, Hugh Jackman, yeah, They aged him really, really well in Logan. So, I mean, the CGI that they have available would be all that they need to make MODOK a reality. I mean, just get a face double to come in and superimpose that face over a really big head in a robotic chair. Why not? Like I said, it's just crazy enough that it would work. Why couldn't you do a storyline that just showed MODOK and floating in the background or something like that? I don't know, it's kind of upsetting. I think that Marvel is kind of afraid to do really ridiculous characters like Fin Fang Foom, because they're ridiculous and they're not grounded to reality. And the MCU is kind of, since it's live action, grounded to reality. But we're approaching a vast new age in which we should be implementing more comic book storylines without having to sacrifice what made those storylines so great to begin with. And that is why I don't think that Brie Larson is good for the role, because she doesn't look like it, but damn did she act it. And for that reason, I give Captain Marvel, I keep saying Miss Marvel because that's her actual name in the comics, I keep giving that accolade away, and it's because Miss Marvel needs to be regarded as Miss Marvel. If you're going to push this social justice warrior garbage down my throat, then you should probably address her as Miss Marvel. Not that there's anything wrong with calling her Captain Marvel, except for she kind of just hasn't earned that title yet. This was her origin story, so I mean, getting back to the topic at hand, how good this movie was, I would rank it at a 7 or an 8 out of 10. It's pretty good. It was moderately entertaining. I don't think that I can call it a picture-perfect movie, especially in comparison to other movies that butchered comic book storylines like Captain America Civil War or Iron Man 3, because it didn't do that good of a job. It butchered way too many things without, offering better detailed explanations. I get that you've got to retcon this character so many times because she's not a popular character and she doesn't have that big of a following. But I mean, God, you can do better than a simple nod to the Flurkin, which is cats in disguise.
Adam Warlock is a big part of the comic books in terms of solving the problem.
Yeah.
How is it going against somebody as powerful, like Thanos, without Adam Warlock in play?
Well, you'll have to root for characters that you've come to love over 10 years. That's right. Like, we're not going to introduce Adam Warlock and have everyone turn to him and say, you solved this problem, new guy. Right? We want the problem to get solved by people who you've come to love.
Sure.
I like this movie. I couldn't help, but I didn't want to like it because at the time I was impartial and I had it out for Brie Larson. I had only heard the bad things that the media had to say about her, and I have the same stance with Brie Larson that I had with Donald Trump as president. I don't care who you are as a person. You could be a very foul, mean-spirited individual, but as long as you do the job that you were employed to do, that's all I care about. I don't care what you say on Twitter. I don't care how you perform outside of your job. That's your business. As long as you're not hurting anybody, I really don't care. So that's why I support Trump, is because out of the 3 that were given to us as candidates, he was the most qualified. I can literally find a 40-minute long video of Hillary Clinton lying, straight out lying. I mean, saying that she doesn't support FAFSA, 7 years ago, and then in current day saying that she supports FAFSA. It's one thing to change your opinion over time. It's a totally different thing to say the polar opposite nearly a decade later. So I'm not going to elect a liar. And then Bernie Sanders didn't have a job until he was like 40. So I'm thinking to myself, if you couldn't even run a gas station, what hope do you have of running America? So I chose the lesser of 3 evils, and that was Trump, because Trump was qualified. People tell me that he wasn't qualified because he's filed for bankruptcy for 3 times. Well, guess what? Failure is the best teacher, which still makes Trump more qualified. That means if he has filed for bankruptcy and he has lost, a good amount of shareholdings, he's also recovered from that. And if he's recovered from that, that means that he kind of knows how to deal with failure as a president. He knows how to bounce back from it. That's just the way I look at it. I'm very impartial to it. I don't believe people when they say he's racist, so naturally I'm not going to believe people when they say that Brie Larson is a man-hating feminist lunatic. I do believe that she's a feminist and maybe on the radical, more extreme side, but I'm not going to comment on her as a person because everything else that I've found outside of what people are trying to tell me was contrary to what they were saying. She's a writer and a director. She spent some time, pursuing pop. She was like a musical, she sang. And it was like a very cliche, like teen girl, sappy rock song. But I mean, she's really talented and smart and a fangirl. And I'm not fanboying over her because I'm not aroused by her sexually, and her personality is just a little bit too bubbly for me. I mean, I like my folk dark and dreary. I like my folk dark and dreary like my fantasies. So I like my coffee black just like my metal, quote unquote, the mindless self-indulgence variety. I'm gonna conclude this video by stating that if you have interest for Miss Marvel, go and see it. And I don't want to make a habit out of doing reviews like this because I reviewed the reviewers in the Venom movie, and I didn't want to do it then, and I don't want to do it now. But I feel obligated to set the record straight when everywhere I go on YouTube is talking about the failures of Captain Marvel. I don't think that they failed. I think the worst case scenario that could happen here is that Marvel could, replace Brie Larson after Endgame, and that'll be that.
Oh! Canada!
I like this one.
That's all I have to say on that matter. Again, if you have even the slightest bit of interest, but you have been kept at bay because of everything YouTube has been telling you about the social justice warrior propaganda, just fucking ignore it. Honestly. Just ignore all the bullshit that's being said. Go see this movie. Judge it for yourself. You're probably going to like it. So if you like this video, you found it to be educational, enlightening, whatever, do as I always encourage you to do. Smash that like button. Rate, share, comment, subscribe. And when you subscribe, also make sure to ring that bell icon so that you are updated to the very second in which I go live or upload new content. And until next time, this has been Vance, signing out. Peace.